Her own sister pushed her off the wagon and left her to freeze to death in a Wyoming blizzard. Clara Hendricks knelt in the snow, watching the wagon disappear into the white void. Not a single person looked back. After 8 months of being treated like a burden following her husband's death, her own blood abandoned her with nothing but $12, a thin coat, and a mother's Bible. She figured she had 2 hours before the cold would win. But just as her fingers went numb and hope slipped away, she heard hoofbeats cutting through the howling wind. A man's voice commanded through the storm, "Get up! You are coming with me!" That stranger? He was carrying wounds just as deep as hers. A dead wife, a baby he buried with his own hands, 10 years of silence and guilt. What happens when two broken souls find each other in the middle of a storm? Can a woman left for dead find the strength to not only survive, but to rise, love again, and face the sister who betrayed her? Stay with me until the end. This story will change how you see second chances. Sometimes being abandoned by the wrong people is exactly what leads you into the arms of the right one. Your lowest moment might just be the doorway to your greatest blessing. If this message speaks to your heart, drop a comment telling me where you are listening from tonight. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that reminds you of your own strength. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You never know whose storm you might help them survive. The wind sliced through her thin coat, and the sky overhead looked like a fresh bruise. Her feet were already numb. She knew a blizzard was coming. That is exactly why they abandoned her. She figured she had 2 hours at most. Kneeling in the snow, her numb fingers found her mother's Bible and a few crushed biscuits. She had just $12.30 to her name. Hope was nowhere in sight. "God, please," she prayed, her voice cracking. "Do not let me die out here like trash." Just then she heard it. Through the swirling snow, a man on a dark horse rode straight toward her. A lone woman had every reason to fear a stranger, but freezing to death seemed a whole lot worse. He pulled his horse up a few feet away. He was a big man with eyes weathered by years of sun and snow. An old scar ran along his jawline. "Ma'am," his voice was like gravel. "What are you doing out here?" She tried to speak, but she could only shiver. His eyes saw the broken trunk and her thin coat, and he understood everything. "Wagon train left you," he stated. It was not a question. She just nodded. He swung down from his horse and lifted her to her feet like she weighed nothing at all. The warmth from his hands was a shock after the bitter cold. "My things," she whispered, pointing at her scattered belongings. "Leave them," he said. "But my mother's quilt." His voice was firm. "Ma'am, that quilt will not keep you warm when you are dead. We have to go now." He looked her straight in the eye. "Do you understand?" She nodded. He lifted her onto his horse, settling her in the saddle. "Hold on tight," he said, getting on behind her. His arms wrapped around her to grab the reins, creating a shield against the wind. "We are headed for my cabin." "Sir, I do not even know your name." "It is Callahan," he said, urging the horse on. "Samuel Callahan. And ma'am, you can either trust me and live, or you can stay here and freeze. It is your choice." Clara held on tighter. They rode as the snow began to fall harder. Callahan's voice rumbled near her ear. "Talk to me, Clara Hendricks. People get quiet right before the cold takes them." Her words were slow and slurred. "My own sister, Mr. Callahan. My own blood left me here to die." Callahan was quiet for a long moment. "Some people are not worth being called family," he finally said. Clara felt a frozen piece of her heart crack. "No," she whispered. "I suppose they are not." She felt herself start to drift away, the cold pulling her under. "Hey," his arm tightened around her. "Stay with me. We are almost there. Tell me about your husband." "Thomas," she breathed. "He was a kind man. When I lost our babies, he just held me. He said it was not my fault. A fever took him 8 months ago. After 9 years of marriage," she cried softly, "I ended up with nothing, absolutely nothing left. "You've got yourself," Clara said with a bitter laugh. "And what good is that?" Sam Callahan's voice was low but steady. "More than you know, ma'am. A person's own grit is all they have when everything else is gone." He pointed through the snow. A small cabin stood ahead, a wisp of smoke rising from its chimney. "Left a fire going. Always do." At the cabin, he swung down from his horse and reached for her. "All right. Let's get you warm." Clara tried to move, but her legs were frozen, useless. "I can't," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Without a word, Sam wrapped his arms around her, lifted her clean off the horse, and carried her inside. "I've got you," he said, kicking the door open against the wind. The sudden warmth was so intense it felt like a slap, and a cry escaped her lips. "Easy now," Sam said, placing her in a chair by the fire. "That's the feeling coming back. It's gonna hurt." He moved with purpose, adding wood to the fire and pulling down blankets. As the heat soaked in, Clara began to tremble. "My feet," she gasped. "They feel like they're on fire." "That's a good sign," Sam said, kneeling before her. He gently pulled off her frozen boots and stockings, hissing at the sight of her pale bluish toes. "Frostbite." We caught it just in time. He started rubbing her feet, the friction sending waves of sharp pain through her. "This'll hurt worse before it gets better," he warned. She bit her lip against the agony, focusing on his steady hands and the crackling fire. Slowly, the needle-sharp pains faded into a deep, throbbing ache. "Better?" he asked. She could only nod. She looked at this stranger who had just saved her life. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you help me?" Sam was quiet for a moment, his gaze lost in the fire. "Found someone once," he said, his voice rough with memory. "A woman, out in the snow just like you. I was too late. She was frozen solid, reaching for something I couldn't see." He stood up and turned away. "I never forgot her. Just don't make me find another one." He handed her a hot cup of tea. "Drink this." Clara cradled the cup, letting the warmth seep into her bones. "Thank you," she said softly. Sam. She was alive. Her sister had left her for dead. But she was alive. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like it mattered. The blizzard kept them inside for 3 days. In that time, Clara learned a little about Sam Callahan. He was 38, a former soldier who never spoke of the war. He'd lost his wife, Margaret, and their child in childbirth long ago. "That's why you're out here alone?" she asked. He just poked the fire. "I'm better company for myself than for other folks." He looked at her briefly. "Once the storm clears, I'll take you to Elk Creek. It's a town about 20 miles from here. You can get a room at the boarding house and figure things out." Clara felt a strange pinch of disappointment, but nodded. She was just a problem he had found, one he was eager to solve. On the second night, a cry from across the cabin woke Clara. Sam was caught in a nightmare, thrashing in his bedroll. "Margaret, no," he pleaded, his voice thick with grief. "Hold on." Forgetting herself, Clara crossed the small room and put a hand on his shoulder. "Sam, wake up." He woke instantly, his hand clamping around her wrist with the force of a steel trap. His eyes were wide and wild. Then he saw her, and the fight went out of him. He let her go, as if she were a hot coal. "Clara," he breathed, the name a ragged apology. She simply rubbed her wrist. "It is all right. You were dreaming. It was a bad dream." He sat up, his hands buried in his hair. "I'm sorry if I woke you." "You didn't," she lied softly. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." The word was a slammed door. As she moved to leave, his voice caught her. "It was the night she died, Margaret." He stared into the fire. "The baby came too soon, so much blood. She just kept calling my name, and I could not do a thing but hold her hand. The baby, a little girl, lived for 3 hours. I buried them both out behind the cabin. That's why I came out here." His voice broke. "I could not stand to feel that helpless again." Clara took his hand. "I lost 2 babies," she said, her voice a whisper. Before they were ever born. I understand, Sam. I truly do. They sat in the quiet, their hands clasped together as the fire crackled. You should get back to sleep, he finally said. But he did not let go. So should you. I do not sleep much anymore. Well then, do not sleep, she said. Talk to me. And so he did. All through that long night they shared stories they had never told another soul. He spoke of the war. She spoke of a cold marriage and a sister's resentment. When the sun finally broke through, they were wrung out and empty of secrets. But something new was there between them. A connection deeper than just gratitude. The storm's breaking, Sam said quietly. We might make for Elk Creek tomorrow. Yes, Clara agreed. But for a long moment, neither of them moved. On the fourth morning, the storm was finally over. Sam stood at the door, looking out. Snow is deep, he said, but the sky is clear. We can reach Elk Creek by nightfall. Clara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. I see. Sam turned, and his face was full of doubt, a look she had not seen before. Clara, he started, then stopped. I was just thinking about Elk Creek and what happens when we get there. He wrestled with his words. I have been alone for a very long time. I thought I wanted it that way. Thought I was better off. He shook his head. Now I am not so sure. Clara's heart started to pound. What are you trying to say, Sam? He stepped closer. I am saying these last few days I have talked more and felt more than I have in 10 years. And I'm saying the thought of leaving you in Elk Creek feels wrong. Then do not. The words tumbled out of her before she could stop them. Do not ride away. Stay. She reached up, her fingers trembling against his jaw. I have spent my whole life being careful and proper. And for what? To be left for dead in a storm. You saved my life, Sam Callahan. You made me feel seen again. Her voice cracked. Please do not make me go back to being invisible. He stared down at her for a long moment before his lips met hers. It was a brief, gentle kiss. I should not have done that, he said, his voice rough. Why not? Because I have nothing to offer you, Clara. I live in a cabin. I trap critters for a living. I wake up screaming from nightmares. You deserve better. Don't I get to decide what I deserve? You do not know what you are asking for, he insisted. I am asking for the man who saved a stranger, who stayed up all night just to talk, a man who cannot give you a future, he cut in, his voice cracking. I buried my future 10 years ago, Clara, with my wife and my daughter. His pain was a raw, open wound. I am not asking for forever, Sam, she said softly. I am just asking for a chance. He stood there, a war fighting inside him. We should go, he finally said. The snow is not getting any shallower. It was not a yes, but it was not a no. Clara gathered her things, her heart heavy, not knowing which would have been worse. The silence between them felt heavy as the horse pushed through snowdrifts. Sam finally broke it, his voice low. I need to tell you something about Elk Creek, he said. The sheriff there, Tom Brody. He was in my unit during the war. I trust him with my life. Clara felt a knot in her stomach. You are taking me to him? I am taking you to someone who can help, Sam replied, his voice heavy. I don't know what is waiting for us. Your sister, Ruth, might have sent word ahead, but Tom will make sure you are treated fair. Clara twisted to see his face. You think she might have told people I died? Sam's answer was blunt. I think a woman who would leave you to freeze would tell any lie that suits her. The thought hit Clara like a punch. If Ruth said she was dead, her arrival in town would cause a whole mess of trouble. I do not care what she told them, Clara said, her voice full of a new strength. I am alive, and I am done letting her run my life. Sam's arm tightened around her waist for just a moment. They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat. Under the bright sun, Clara squinted at Sam. Can I ask you about the woman you found frozen years ago? Sam's jaw set hard. I never found out her name. Buried her right where I found her. That must haunt you, Clara said softly. He looked her straight in the eye. Everything haunts me, That is why I live alone. Fewer ghosts to collect. Clara held his gaze. Maybe ghosts are not the only things worth collecting. A long moment passed before they mounted up and rode on. Soon they saw smoke from chimneys and fence posts sticking out of the snow. Getting close now, Sam said. Clara's stomach was full of butterflies. What was she going to find in Elk Creek? She was a stranger with nothing but the clothes on her back brought to town by a mountain man. Sam, she started, whatever happens, I want to thank you. Do not thank me yet, he grumbled. I am not thanking you for the town. I am thanking you for you. He was quiet for a long time. Then, so low she almost missed it, he said, You are welcome. Elk Creek was bigger than she had pictured. As they rode down the main street, people stopped and stared. That is Sam Callahan, a man said loudly. Who is that woman with him? Sam paid them no mind. He led the horse straight to the sheriff's office and helped Clara down. Stay close, he whispered. Let me do the talking. She felt a blush of shame, thinking how she must look in her wrinkled dress with her messy hair. Sam pushed open the door to a warm office. A man about Sam's age with a thick mustache looked up from his desk, his eyes wide. Well, I will be, he said, standing up. Sam Callahan. I figured you were dead up in those mountains. Not yet, Tom, Sam said as they shook hands. Who is your friend? The sheriff asked, looking at Clara. This is Clara. I found her 4 days ago, left in the snow by her own sister. Sheriff Brody's eyes narrowed on Clara. Her sister pushed her off the wagon and left her to die, Sam added. The sheriff let out a low whistle. That is colder than this weather. Please, ma'am, sit by the stove and tell me everything. Clara told her story, and with every word the sheriff's face grew darker. Her wagon train was headed for California, Clara finished. The sheriff sighed. That is likely out of my reach. Besides, your sister would just lie and say you wandered off. I do not want to press charges, Clara said, her voice steady. I just want to start a new life. The sheriff looked from her to Sam. You got any money or skills? I can read, write, and do figures, and I have $12. That will not last, the sheriff said. I will find work, Clara insisted. He nodded slowly. There is a boarding house run by a widow named Agnes Mallister. She might have a room. He looked at Sam. Are you vouching for her? Sam met Clara's gaze, and a silent promise passed between them. Yeah, Tom, he said. I am vouching for her. All right, then, the sheriff said, grabbing his coat. I will take you there myself. Sam, are you coming? No, Sam said flatly. I have got business. Clara's heart sank. He was just going to leave? Sam, she began. I will be around, he said, not quite looking at her. And then he was gone. Mrs. Agnes Mallister was a thin woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. So, she said after the sheriff left, you are the one Sam Callahan pulled from the snow, and your sister left you to die. Yes, ma'am, Clara answered. Sit down, child, Mrs. Mallister said, her voice surprisingly gentle. I will make us some tea. As the kettle whistled, she spoke. My husband was a good man for 15 years. Then he found the bottle. He is dead now, and I am not. She set a cup in front of Clara. I tell you this so you understand. I do not take in just anyone. I take in women who have been through the fire and survived. That boarding house belongs to women who have earned their survival, you understand? Yes, ma'am. I think I do. Good. Mrs. Mallister studied Clara over her teacup. Room and board is $4 a week. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. No men upstairs, no exceptions. And you will help with chores. Everyone pulls their weight here. I am happy to work. Mrs. Mallister set her cup down. Sam Callahan vouched for you, and that man does not vouch for anyone. I have known him 8 years, and he has never said more than a dozen words. Heard he lost his wife and a baby. That kind of loss changes a man. Yes, Clara said softly. It does. I can see you have got losses of your own, Mrs. Mallister said, then stood. Come, I will show you your room. It was small, but it was clean. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt safe. There is water for washing. Make yourself presentable, the older woman said. After she left, Clara sat on the bed, the first soft bed in days, and finally let out a long breath. She was safe. She had a chance. But her mind kept going back to the quiet mountain man. Would she ever see him again? She told herself it was foolish to care about a man she'd known for less than a week. She washed and changed into her last clean dress, a simple blue calico. In the dining room, 3 other women sat at a long table. Ladies, Mrs. Mallister announced, this is Clara Hendris. There was Mary, a young, sad-eyed widow. There was Dorothy, a dignified woman of mixed heritage. And there was old Bess, who seemed to find the whole world faintly ridiculous. Heard you rode in with Sam Callahan, old Bess said, her voice raspy. Yes, ma'am, that's true, old Bess grunted, poking at her food. That man's a tough nut to crack. Been trying for years. Bess, leave the girl be, Mrs. Mallister cut in. She's been through plenty. Bess just winked at Clara. Don't mind me, child. I'm too old to care what folks think. Clara couldn't help but smile. Later, washing dishes, a quiet woman named Dorothy gave her arm a gentle squeeze. It gets easier, she whispered. Starting over. I came here 3 years back from San Francisco. Mrs. Mallister gave me a chance. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about the husband she'd lost, the sister who'd betrayed her, and the man who'd saved her life only to vanish, Sam Callahan. She remembered his kiss and his words, how he said he had nothing to offer her. But he was wrong. He'd offered her honesty and protection. And then he just walked away. Clara pulled the blanket tight. Tomorrow, she'd find work and prove her worth to this town of Elk Creek. 3 days passed with no sign of Sam. Clara kept busy, learning the town needed a school teacher, something fierce. She marched right into Mayor Wilson's office. You can read, write, and do figures, the mayor asked, sizing her up. Yes, sir. My father was a professor. He taught me well. The mayor's eyebrows shot up. A professor's daughter way out here in Wyoming? How'd that happen? Life takes you places you don't expect, sir. He studied her a good long while. I like you, Mrs. Hendricks, he finally nodded. You've got spine. We need that out here. He offered her $20 a month to teach the 12 children of Elk Creek in the church basement until the schoolhouse was built. Clara's heart soared. I'll take it. You can start on Monday. Walking back to the boarding house, feeling lighter than she had in ages, she saw him. Sam was standing outside the general store talking with Sheriff Brody. He was all cleaned up with a new coat and proper boots. He looked like a different man. When he saw her, he stopped talking and their eyes locked across the dusty street. He said something to the sheriff, then started walking straight for her. Her heart hammered in her chest. After 3 days of silence, what could he possibly have to say? Clara, his voice was rough. Heard you got the teaching job. News travels fast in a small town, she managed. They just stood there, the space between them thick with things unsaid. The air was thick with things unsaid. Clara wanted to demand why he had left, but pride kept her silent. You look good, Sam finally said. Mrs. Mallister keeps a fine house. She does, Clara agreed. He shifted his feet, looking uneasy. I should have come back sooner. I meant to. You just what? She pressed. His jaw set firm. I needed time to think about you, about us. He met her gaze, and she saw the war inside him. I haven't felt a thing for anyone in 10 years, Clara. Then you showed up." He shook his head. "I am not asking for all the answers, Sam," she said, stepping closer. "I am just asking you not to run." "I am not running. I am here." "Are you really?" The question hung between them. Sam took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I am here," he said softly, "and I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want you to." "Then I will not." It was not a promise of forever, but for now it was enough. "Can I walk you home?" he asked. "Yes, I would." "Like that." They walked through the snowy streets of Elk Creek, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. That evening, Sam called on her at the boarding house. Mrs. Mallister showed him into the parlor, then sat in the hallway with her sewing, acting as a chaperone. "She does not trust me," Sam noted with a small smile. "She does not trust anyone," Clara replied. They sat apart, as was proper, but their eyes kept meeting across the room. "I went back to my cabin," Sam said. "I needed to see if it could be more than just a place to hide." "And what did you decide?" He leaned forward. "I decided it is just a building. It has not been a home since my Margaret died." "I am so sorry, Sam." "Do not be." His eyes were clear. "For the first time in 10 years, I think I want it to be a home again. I think I might be ready." Clara held her breath. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I have been dead inside for a long time." "Then you came along and something woke up." He reached out and took her hand. "I am not good at this. I do not know how to court a woman. But I want to try, if you will let me." Tears streamed down her face. "Sam, I know it is fast," she whispered, "but when I thought I had lost you in that storm, I do not want to be alone anymore." "Neither do I." They sat holding hands, with the fire crackling and Mrs. Mallister's shadow in the hall. It was not private or grand, but it was real. "I should let you get your rest," Sam said, but he did not let go of her hand. "You have your first day of teaching tomorrow. Will you come to the church to see how it goes?" His smile was slow and real. "I would not miss it." At the door, Mrs. Mallister watched them closely. "Good night, Clara," Sam said, his fingers brushing her cheek for just a moment. Then he was gone. "He is a good man," Mrs. Mallister said from beside her. "Damaged, but good." "I know. Be careful. Men like that can break easy." Clara nodded. "I will be." She went to her room but could not sleep, thinking about her new life and this new feeling that felt an awful lot like love. She had been left to die in the snow, but instead of death, she had found a purpose. Monday morning was cold and clear. Clara walked to the church basement where 12 children aged 6 to 15 waited for her. She took a deep breath. "Good morning. My name is Mrs. Harris, and I am your new teacher." "Where are you from?" a boy asked. "I came from Philadelphia by way of the worst blizzard this territory has seen in 20 years, she said with a smile. "It has been quite a trip." She looked at each of them. "I know some of you think school is a waste of time, so let me tell you something. Everything I am is because of my education. When I had nothing else left, I still had my mind. No one can ever take that away from you." The room was quiet. "Now," she said, straightening up, "who wants to learn?" By day's end, Clara was tired but happy. She was gathering her books when Sam appeared in the doorway. "How long have you been there?" she asked. "Long enough," he said, stepping inside. "You are a natural at this. Those children were hanging on your every word." He faced her, his expression serious. "You found your calling, Clara." "Or maybe it found me," she smiled. He stood so close she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "I have been thinking about the future," he said, "about what kind of life I want." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small that shined in the light. "And about if I am brave enough to ask for what I really want." Her heart nearly stopped. "Sam, I know this is sudden," he said in a rush. "I know we have only known each other a week. I know I am damaged and not what you probably dreamed of. But I have felt more alive this past week than I have in 10 years. When I think about tomorrow, I actually want to see it. And it is because of you." He opened his hand. Inside was a simple gold ring. "It was Margaret's," he said quietly. "The only thing I kept. I think I was waiting for someone. For you." Clara could not breathe. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow," Sam said. "I am just asking for a chance to court you properly, to be the man you deserve." Clara silenced him with a kiss. It was not hesitant like their first one. This kiss was a promise. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead on hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That is a yes," she whispered. "To all of it." Sam slipped the ring on her finger. It was a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting there for her all along. In the quiet of the church basement, they were just two broken people who had found each other in a storm. And as the snow started to fall again outside, something new was beginning inside. Well, word spread through Elk Creek faster than a prairie fire. By the next morning, the whole town knew Sam Callahan had given Clara Hendricks his dead wife's ring. "A week," Clara heard Mrs. Patterson gossiping outside the general store. "She's known him 1 week. What kind of woman does that?" Clara kept her chin high, but the words stung. Back at the boarding house, Mrs. Mallister was waiting, arms crossed. "Sit down," she said. "Half this town thinks you're a gold digger, and the other half thinks Sam's lost his mind. What do you think, Mrs. Mallister?" The older woman looked at her hard. "I think you're two lost souls trying to piece each other back together. I just can't decide if that's brave or foolish." "I love him," Clara said, the words tumbling out. Clara insisted she loved him, but Mrs. Mallister was a practical woman. "Love does not pay the bills, child. It does not stop tongues from wagging in this town." Clara asked what would work. The older woman's face softened just a bit. "Time," she said, "and proving them wrong day after day." Clara promised she could do it. Mrs. Mallister warned her that small towns have long memories. They will watch you, and they will wait for you to fail. Clara stood tall. Let them watch. For the first time, Mrs. Mallister truly smiled. The town tested Clara, but Sam was her rock. He visited every single evening, and they talked for hours, sharing their pasts and dreaming of a future. One evening, Clara asked Sam if the town gossip bothered him. His jaw set hard. "It bothers me that they are saying it about you. I am used to their talk, but you do not deserve it." Clara said it was not fair for him either. "That is just the way things are," Sam said, taking her hand gently. 3 weeks later, the church door flew open right in the middle of class. A furious, travel-worn woman stood there, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Clara. "I knew you were not dead," she snarled. The room fell silent. With a steady voice, Clara dismissed the children for the day. "How did you find me?" Clara asked when they were alone. The woman, Ruth, just scoffed. "Word travels." Clara faced the sister who had left her for dead. Ruth's laugh was cold as a Wyoming winter. "I knew I would find you," Ruth said. "Did you come all this way just to make sure I was alive?" Clara asked, her voice steady. "I came to bring you home." Clara stared. "Home? You mean back to the wagon you threw me from during a blizzard?" "That was Harold's decision," Ruth snapped. "A decision you did not fight," Clara replied quietly. Ruth's gaze swept across the small schoolhouse, landing on the simple ring on Clara's finger. "Look at you, playing teacher in this little old town, married to that mountain man, Sam." You are the one who took everything from me, Ruth. I had nothing to leave. So why are you really here? Clara demanded. Ruth's answer hit her like a punch. Harold is dead. The words hung in the air. A fever took him. Just 3 weeks after we left you. It took 2 of the children with him. Jenny and the baby are gone. Clara felt the world tilt. Little Jenny, who loved her stories. The baby boy. Oh, Ruth, she breathed. But Ruth's grief was a weapon. Are you sorry? You should be. If you had been there to help, maybe they would have lived. I did everything right. And now my world is gone while you have everything. But you got what you wanted, did not you? Ruth's voice was filled with poison. While I was burying my family, you were falling in love. God did not do this, Ruth. You did, Clara said, her voice firm. You made a choice. So this is how I am punished? Ruth cried. This is not about punishment. This is about life. It is not fair. It just is. A long silence passed. When did you become so hard? Ruth asked. The day my own sister left me to die in the snow. Finally, the fight drained from Ruth. In a small voice, she said, I came to apologize, Clara, for all of it. Then why did you not come back for me? Clara asked, the old pain rising in her throat. Because I was afraid, Ruth confessed, the admission costing her dearly. I was terrified of him. I have been afraid my whole life, Clara. And now I have nothing. She looked utterly broken. Where will you go now? Clara asked. Ruth just shook her head. I suppose I will head back to California. Try to survive. My son, Thomas, is all I have left. He is waiting with the wagon outside of town. Clara thought of that boy alone and grieving. She thought of her sister lost and afraid. And she made a choice. Stay, she said, the word hanging in the air. Stay here in Elk Creek. Thomas can join my class. Ruth's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. After everything I did to you? I am not doing this for you, Clara said softly. I am offering you a chance to stop being afraid. Why? Ruth whispered, tears streaming down her face. Because you are my sister, Clara's voice broke, and I know what it feels like to be completely alone. I would not wish that on anyone, not even you. Ruth finally broke, sobbing in her sister's arms. An hour later, Sam found Clara in the empty church. He sat beside her, his presence a comfort. The sheriff told me your sister was in town, he said gently. Are you okay? She leaned against his solid shoulder and told him everything. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You invited her to stay, he said, full of wonder. Does that make me a fool? She asked. It makes you human, Sam said, his voice soft. It makes you the woman I fell in love with. Clara looked at him, startled. He had never said those words before. I love you too, she whispered, her tears now full of joy. Then there is nothing to be scared of, Sam said, cupping her face in his hands. I am not going anywhere. Not ever. In that moment, Clara knew this was where she belonged. This small town with this good man was her home. When they finally broke their kiss, Sam rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. I know we said we would take it slow, but life is too short, Clara. He took both of her hands in his. I am not a rich man. I cannot promise you a life of ease. But I can promise to love you every single day for the rest of my life. I will never leave you. Joyful tears streamed down Clara's face as she began to laugh. Yes, she said through her smile. Yes, I will marry you. Sam's grin was like the sunrise. He pulled her close and whispered, Thank you for giving me a reason to live again. Thank you for finding me, she said. Thank you for not just riding past. Sam shook his head. I never could have. When I saw you there in the snow, something deep inside me just knew. It knew you were important. He gave a small laugh. Sounds crazy to say out loud. Clara gently touched his face. It sounds like fate. They sat together in the quiet church, making plans for a life built on stubborn hope. Clara knew it would not be easy, but for the first time in so long, she was not afraid. In the days that followed, Ruth and her quiet son, Thomas, moved into the boarding house, and Sam began to prepare his cabin for a new wife and a new life. Have you ever seen a good person's happiness threatened by a ghost from the past? That is exactly what happened to Clara, the new schoolteacher in Elk Creek. She had found love with Sam, a quiet mountain man with a troubled soul. The townsfolk, who once gossiped, had a change of heart, and even helped build them a proper home. But just 2 days before their wedding, a group of hard-looking men rode into town, and their leader had a jagged scar on his face. This story is about whether love is strong enough to heal old wounds. Stick around to see if a good woman's courage can truly save a man from his own history. One of the riders spotted Clara. He called out, asking if she was the schoolteacher. Clara ignored him and walked faster, but the man blocked her path with his horse. Up close, his eyes were cold as ice. He said he was looking for Sam Callahan. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice even. I do not know who you are talking about. The man leaned down, his scarred face just inches from hers. Do not lie to me. Where is he? Suddenly, Sam's voice cut through the tension. Clara. He was walking toward them, his hand resting near the revolver on his hip. The scarred man smiled slowly. Well, well, Sam Callahan. It has been a long time. Sam stopped 10 feet away, his body tight like a coiled spring. Not long enough, Garrett. Clara looked between them, her mind racing with fear. Sam, who is this? Someone from my past, Sam said, his gaze locked on Garrett. Garrett laughed a cruel, ugly sound. Did he tell you what he really is, little schoolteacher, what he did during the war? I know he fought for the Union, Clara said, her voice shaking. He did more than fight, Garrett sneered. We rode together. We hunted men down like animals. He got this scar on my face, saving his life. And do you know how he repaid me? He testified against me. That is why I spent 5 years in prison. That is enough, Garrett, Sam said, his voice low and dangerous. You lost everything because you murdered innocent people, Sam stated. I have been paying for my part in that every single day since. Garrett's hand moved toward his gun. Time seemed to stop. Just as violence was about to erupt, Clara shouted, Stop! And stepped right between them. No, she said, facing Garrett directly. Killing him will not fix what happened. Garrett stared, his hard eyes flickering with surprise. I know that vengeance is a poison, Clara continued, her voice clear and strong. And I know that if you kill him, you will spend the rest of your life running. The street was dead silent. After a long moment, Garrett slowly dropped his hand. You have got spine, schoolteacher. He looked at Sam, then turned his horse and rode away without another word. Sam rushed to Clara, wrapping his arms around her. He could have killed you, he whispered, his voice trembling. But he did not, Clara said, looking up at the man she loved. And now, it is over. Clara looked him square in the eye. Whatever happened in that war, you have spent 10 long years punishing yourself for it. It is time to stop. His voice was just a whisper. I do not know how. Then let me help you, she said. Let me show you that you are a good man. Later that night, a soft knock came at her door. It was her sister, Ruth, her face pale in the moonlight. I could not sleep either, Ruth said. Tomorrow is the big day. Are you nervous? Clara nodded. I am terrified, and I have never been happier. Ruth looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. I reckon I thought I loved Harold, or maybe I just wanted to so badly I tricked myself into believing it. She met Clara's gaze. He was not a bad man, not at first. But the years changed him. Sam is different. Anyone with eyes can see that in the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon and the stars. Ruth, Clara started, I forgave you. I know, Ruth whispered, but I have not forgiven myself. Clara took her sister's hands in hers. Then let me help you, the same way Sam is helping me. We have both made mistakes, but we are still here. We still have a chance. They sat together in the quiet darkness, feeling like sisters again. You ought to get some sleep, Ruth finally said, standing to leave. She paused at the door. You still want me up there with you? You are my sister, Clara replied. Where else would you be? The wedding morning dawned clear and cold. Dorothy and old Bess fussed over Clara's hair and dress. Sam is going to fall right over when he sees you, Dorothy said with a grin. Just then, Mrs. Mallister stood in the doorway. The minister is ready, she announced, and there is someone here to see you. It was not Sam. It was Ruth's son, Thomas. The boy stood there, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best, holding something in his hands. He held out a small bunch of winter wildflowers. Ma said you needed something to carry, he mumbled, his face turning red. I picked these myself. Clara's eyes stung with tears. Thomas, they are beautiful. She bent down and kissed his forehead. He ducked his head and hurried away, but not before she saw him smile. As they walked to the church, Ruth linked her arm through Clara's. The people of Elk Creek came out to call their good wishes, a true Texas welcome. The church doors were open, and Clara's heart began to pound in her chest. There, at the very front, stood Sam. He was in a new suit, looking so different from the rough man who had saved her from the snow. But when his eyes met hers, she saw it. It was that look Ruth had described, like she was his whole world. Mrs. Mallister gave her a gentle push. Go on now. He is waiting. Clara walked up that aisle, not with a father, but with a town that had become her family. Sam took her hands in his, and she could feel that they were trembling. I was so afraid I would wake up and this would all be a dream, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is not a dream, she promised him. I am real. The minister's words were simple. I do, Clara said, her voice steady and clear. I do, Sam managed to say, his eyes shining with tears. Then the minister smiled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Sam cupped her face in his big hands and kissed her. The whole church erupted in cheers, and Clara knew she was finally home. Their wedding was a simple, joyful celebration. The whole town of Elk Creek seemed to be there, sharing in a feast and wishing them well. Later, music started to play, and Sam, who had never danced a day in his life, took Clara's hand. Dance with me, he asked. They moved together on the small dance floor, a little awkward at first, but soon they found a rhythm that was all their own. It felt as if they had been dancing together for their entire lives. Are you happy? Sam asked, pulling her close. More than I ever thought was possible, she answered. Good, he said, his voice thick with emotion, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. 3 months ago, he said softly, I was a lonely man in a cabin, convinced I would never feel anything again. Now I have everything. He looked into her eyes. Thank you, he whispered, his voice cracking just a little, for saving me. Clara smiled and gently touched his cheek. You saved me first, she said. And in the warm glow of the lanterns, they held each other, two souls who had found their way home. The cold air hit Clara like a wall when they stepped outside, but Sam's hand was warm and steady in hers. They walked up a hill in the quiet moonlight, the sounds of the town fading behind them. At the top, he stopped. This is where I buried them, Sam said quietly. Margaret and the baby, right here, under this old tree. Clara's heart ached for him. "I come here sometimes to talk to them," he confessed, his voice vulnerable. "I wanted you to know about this place. I wanted you to know that they mattered." Clara stepped closer to him. "Of course they mattered, Sam. Margaret was your wife. She is a part of your life, and that makes her a part of mine too. I do not want you to forget her." Tears filled Sam's eyes. "She would have liked you," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished locket. This was hers. "I want you to have it." He pressed the little treasure into her hand. "It is not a replacement. It is a way of connecting the two parts of my life, the part before and the part after. You are my after, Clara." She opened the locket. Inside was a faded portrait of a young woman with gentle eyes. "She was beautiful," Clara whispered, pressing the locket to her heart. They walked back down that hill, hand in hand, their future now built upon an honored past. They were partners now, tied together by something deeper than love, something born from sharing your deepest hurts. As the party wound down, Clara found her sister Ruth watching from a corner. "You're leaving tomorrow," Clara said softly. "Back to California," Ruth confirmed, then hesitated. Unless you think we should stay?" "I know I don't deserve it. But Thomas is happy in your school. And me." Her voice trailed off. "I'm just so tired of running, Clara. Here, people know the worst of me. And somehow that feels more honest than pretending somewhere else." Clara looked at her sister and saw not the betrayal, but a flawed woman trying to find her way home. "Stay," Clara said, her voice clear. "Really?" Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Really. Elk Creek needs good people. And despite everything, Ruth, you are a good person. You just forgot for a while." "I will try. That is all anyone can ask for." Ruth nodded, her eyes wet with fresh tears. "I promise I'll try." Clara pulled her sister into a tight hug, feeling a long, broken piece of her heart start to heal. Later that night, as the moon hung high in the sky, Clara and Sam finally left the celebration. The town was quiet. Sam lifted her gently into a borrowed wagon and took up the reins beside her. As the horse pulled them toward the cabin that was now their home, Sam tested the name out loud. "Mrs. Callahan." He said it with a smile in his voice. "I surely do like the sound of that." "Me too," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder, tired but happier than she had ever been. He had one more surprise for her when they arrived. "Just one more," he insisted, helping her down. He led her to the door. "Now, close your eyes." Clara did as he asked. She felt the warmth from the cabin on her skin, and smelled wood smoke and something sweet like flowers. "All right, you can open them. When Clara opened her eyes, her breath caught in her chest. The cabin was completely transformed. It was filled with the same kind of winter flowers Thomas had picked for her wedding bouquet. Candles flickered softly on every table and shelf, bathing the small room in a warm glow. In the center, a brand-new dining table stood, set for two. "How did you manage all this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I had some help," Sam admitted, looking a little embarrassed. "Mrs. Mallister and some of the other ladies came out and set it all up for us." Tears of gratitude spilled down Clara's cheeks. "It is just so beautiful." "You are beautiful," Sam said, stepping closer and taking her hands. "I cannot believe you are mine." "I have always been yours, Sam," Clara whispered. "I just did not know it until you pulled me out of that snowstorm." He kissed her then, a deep and promising kiss about the life they would build right here. In his arms, all her old fears and doubts melted away. There was only Sam. "Welcome home, Clara Callahan," he said when they finally parted. "Home," she repeated, tasting the word. "I like that sound." Sam gave her that rare, full smile she treasured. "Me too." In the warmth of the cabin, Clara finally understood. Her whole life, every bit of hardship and betrayal had been a path leading her right here to Sam. She realized her story was not about being abandoned. It was about being found. Spring was coming to Wyoming, and every morning she awoke in his arms, a small miracle. "You are staring again," he would mumble, his eyes still closed. "I like staring at you," she would say, leaning in to kiss him. "You are stuck with me now." Sam would grin and pull her closer. "Worst thing that ever happened to me." Their life together was simple and good. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sam tended his trap lines while Clara taught the town's children. They would meet back at the cabin in the evenings and share stories from their day over supper. It was an ordinary, peaceful life that Clara never thought she could have. But the nights were sometimes hard. Sam still had terrible nightmares from his past. He would wake up screaming, and Clara would hold him tight, whispering to him until the trembling stopped. "I am sorry," he would always say. "Do not ever apologize," she would tell him. "It has been 15 years, he'd say. "I should be over it." "Some things you do not get over," Clara replied softly. "You just learn to carry them differently." Sam looked at her, the old pain still in his eyes. He slowly began to heal. The nightmares came less often. He started to laugh more, a real, genuine sound that Clara treasured. "I never thought I would have this," he told her one night. "A home, a wife. You changed everything for me, Clara." "You changed me too," she said. "Before you, I thought I was worthless, left behind by everyone. I believed I deserved it." "That is not true," Sam said fiercely. "You are precious. You are worth saving." "I know that now," she said, "because of you." He kissed her. We saved each other. Then, one day in late April, Clara knew she was pregnant. Hope was a dangerous feeling after losing 2 babies before, but when she told Sam, his reaction washed away her fear. "A baby," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be," she said. Pure joy transformed his face, and it brought tears to Clara's eyes. "Our baby," he said again, kneeling in front of her. He gently placed his hands on her stomach. "Hello in there," he whispered. "I am your father. I do not know much about being a parent, but I promise I will love you with everything I have. I will protect you every day for the rest of my life." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Clara said, her heart full. "I am scared, Clara," he admitted, his eyes wet with tears. "What if something goes wrong?" "I am scared, too," she said, meeting his gaze. "But we have to live in hope of what could be, not in fear of what might happen. A stubborn mountain man taught me that." Sam pulled her into a tight hug. "I love you so much it terrifies me." The news traveled fast in Elk Creek. Mrs. Mallister cried with joy when she found out. "I am so happy for you, child," she said, hugging Clara. "You deserve this." Ruth's reaction was harder. Clara found her sister scrubbing pots in the kitchen, her movements angry. "Congratulations," Ruth said, not looking up. "Ruth, please, look at me." Her sister finally turned, her face a mask of grief. "I am happy for you, Clara. Truly, it is just—" Her voice broke. "I lost 3 children, and now you get everything." Clara pulled her sister into a hug as Ruth began to sob. "I know it is not fair," Clara whispered. "I know it hurts." "I wanted more children," Ruth cried. "And now I am a 35-year-old widow. Who would want me?" "Someone who sees your worth," Clara said gently. "It happened for me." Ruth gave a small laugh through her tears. The 2 sisters held on, finally starting to heal. "When the baby comes, will you be there?" Clara asked her sister Ruth. Ruth's eyes went wide with shock. "You cannot be serious, not after what I did to you." "I am as serious as I have ever been," Clara said firmly. "You are my sister. We cannot change the past, but we can build a new future. I choose to forgive you. I choose family." Ruth finally broke down, nodding through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, "I choose that too." The following summer was the happiest Clara had ever known. As her belly grew, so did Sam's worrying. He treated her like she was made of delicate glass, constantly trying to do everything for her. He was terrified of losing her the way he had lost his first wife, Margaret, during childbirth. "I am not Margaret," Clara told him gently one afternoon, cupping his worried face in her hands. "I know you are scared, Sam, but you have to trust me. You have to trust us." He held her close, his fear a heavy presence between them. "I just cannot lose you, Clara," he whispered. "You will not," she promised, though she knew it was a promise neither of them could truly keep. The baby decided to prove that point by arriving 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Sam was out checking his trap lines, and Clara was completely alone. A sharp, searing pain tore through her, followed by a wave of pure panic. She feared she would die right there on that cabin floor. With all the strength she had left, Clara dragged herself to the door and managed to wave down a rider. It was Sheriff Brody making his rounds. "Get Sam!" she gasped, and then her world faded into a blur of pain and muffled voices. Her face was a mask of grit and calm. She could still feel Ruth's hand in hers, hear her voice telling her to just breathe, to push. Then finally Sam was there, busting through the door with wild, terrified eyes and snow still clinging to his coat. All she could manage was his name. He knelt by her side, his grip strong. "I am not leaving," he promised. As another wave of pain hit, Mrs. Mallister commanded, "Push, Clara. The baby is coming." With everything she had left, she pushed. And then a new sound filled the room, the cry of a baby. "It is a girl," Mrs. Mallister announced, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the tiny bundle in Clara's arms. "A healthy baby girl." Sam was crying openly, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "She is beautiful," he said, his voice broken. "She looks just like you." He reached out a single finger, gently touching the baby's cheek. "Hello, little one. I am your father." The baby quieted, her newborn eyes seeming to focus on him for just a moment. They named her Margaret Rose Callahan. Margaret for the wife Sam had lost, and Rose for Clara's mother. It was a name that honored the past while looking to the future. "Most women would not want that," Sam said, his voice soft. Clara just smiled. "Well, I am not most women." The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Clara had never been so tired, but she had also never been so happy. "I did not know it would feel like this," she told Sam one night, rocking little Maggie. "Like my heart is walking around outside my body." Sam put his arm around her. "I feel the same way about both of you," he said. As the seasons turned, Maggie grew into a curious little tornado. She took her first steps on her first birthday right into Sam's waiting arms. Her first word was a clear, triumphant "Mama," which made Clara cry for a whole hour. Their lives in Elk Creek blossomed. Clara's school grew and she hired an assistant. Even Ruth found new purpose, helping with the tasks. Sam took on more work as a guide, his quiet nature softening. "You are different," Sheriff Brody told him one evening. "I have reasons to be different now," Sam replied. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Sam took Clara and Maggie to the hilltop where his first wife and child were buried. It was the first time Clara had been back since their own wedding. Sam knelt by the simple stone markers, his voice rough. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I want you to meet someone. This is Clara, my wife, and that little one is Maggie, named after you." He took a shaky breath. "I will always miss you, but I am not broken anymore. Clara, she put me back together." Clara stepped forward and spoke to the graves. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for loving him first. I promise I will take care of him." Just then Maggie toddled toward them, holding up a handful of wildflowers she had picked. With all the seriousness a child can have, Maggie walked over to the larger grave marker and carefully placed her flowers on the stone. "Pretty flowers for Margaret," she announced. "So she not sad." Sam broke down completely, and Clara held him while he cried. Later that night, sitting on their porch, Sam turned to Clara. "That day I found you in the snow," he said. "I almost did not stop. My first thought was to just ride on past and not get involved." He took her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not know what made me stop. Fate, God, dumb luck. But whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day. If I had kept riding, you would have been gone. Maggie would have never been born." 5 years later, Clara and Sam sat together on their porch, watching the stars come out. "You know," Sam said quietly, "I used to think I was the one who saved you that day in the snowstorm." He turned to her, his eyes shining in the twilight. "But the truth is, Clara, you saved me. You gave me a reason to believe life could be good again." Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I reckon you saved me too, in all the ways that count." They listened to the peaceful sound of their daughter Maggie sleeping inside the cabin. Sam pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Thank you for being worth stopping for," he whispered into her hair. Clara leaned against him, feeling a deep sense of peace. She thought about the hopeless woman she had been that day, certain her life was over. Now she had a husband who adored her, a daughter who was her whole world, and a sister who was finally a friend again. She had found her home not in a place, but in a family built from the ashes of her old life. "I love you, Sam Callahan," she said, the words still feeling brand new after 5 years. He gave her that slow, beautiful smile that always made her heart skip a beat. "I love you too. Forever." She had been left behind in a blizzard, abandoned and meant to die. But she did not die. She rose up, she loved, and she built a life more wonderful than she could have ever imagined. Being left behind turned out to be the very thing that led her straight into the arms of forever.